St. Albert-Imington, I got it right.
Yes. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of the concurrence motion, a motion that was strengthened considerably as a result of a Conservative amendment brought forward at the Procedure and House Affairs Committee. In the face of the alarming revelations of Beijing's election interference in two elections that took place under this Prime Minister's watch, interference that has been characterized by Global News and the Globe and Mail based upon their review of CSIS documents as a vast campaign of interference in the 2019 election and an orchestrated machine in the 2021 election to help the Liberals secure a minority government and to defeat certain Conservative candidates. Canadians deserve answers. They deserve to know about the scale of Beijing's election interference, and they deserve to know what is really the heart of the scandal, namely, what did the Prime Minister know, when did he know about it, and what did he do or fail to do about Beijing's attack on our democracy. In order to get to the truth, two things need to happen. First, the Procedure and House Affairs Committee, which is seized with a study on Beijing's election interference, must be able to do its work unimpeded, without the obstruction that we have seen over the past several weeks, driven by the Liberals, but often supported by the junior partner of the cover-up coalition, the NDP.
That's right.
And, Madam Speaker, it's important that a public inquiry be called, an independent public inquiry. And it is a position Conservatives have consistently supported. And indeed, we strengthened the very weak NDP motion at the Procedure and House Affairs Committee, which I will get into momentarily. On both of these questions, what is the NDP's track record? Well, Madam Speaker, it's a pretty pathetic one. The NDP 3 times joined at the direction of their boss, the Prime Minister, with Liberal MPs at the Procedure and House Affairs Committee to block the testimony of Katie Telford. They worked with the Liberals, not once, not twice, but 3 times to block Katie Telford from coming to the committee, a key witness to getting to the bottom of what the Prime Minister knows and what the Prime Minister failed to do about Beijing's election interference. But again, it's what one would expect of the junior partner of the cover-up coalition. Then the NDP, no doubt facing public pressure, suddenly flip-flopped and indicated that they were supporting my straightforward motion to have Katie Telford appear at the Procedure and House Affairs Committee. But, and you would think, Madam Speaker, that if they're posturing their support, that they would welcome a Conservative motion that was brought forward in this House. But then all of a sudden they flip-flopped again and voted against that motion. Now, in fairness to the NDP, they did ultimately support my motion when the Liberals finally ended their filibustering. But again, it took weeks of public pressure, it took weeks of pressure from Conservatives before the NDP finally did the right thing and supported bringing Telford to committee. But it also must be noted that they voted against a much stronger motion that Conservatives put forward in this House that was voted on yesterday, that the NDP, the junior partner of the cover-up coalition, sided with the Liberals, voted against, one that had considerably more teeth than the Proc motion. And in addition to that, Madam Speaker, as the junior partner of the cover-up coalition, they have worked with the Liberals to cover up the production of documents at the Procedure and House Affairs Committee, not once, but twice. They voted against a Conservative motion that would have, instead of giving the government, this Prime Minister, who has so much to answer for, and the PMO, a veto over what is produced to the committee, we proposed that the independent parliamentary law clerk review documents that are relevant, having regard for national security and other considerations. The NDP voted against that. They joined the Liberals, blocking the production of documents. The NDP talks a good game about a public inquiry, but, Madam Speaker, the motion that they put forward at the Procedure and House Affairs Committee was a considerably weak motion. It would have given the Prime Minister the unilateral power to appoint the Commissioner of the Inquiry. Now, Madam Speaker, what Conservatives put forward as an amendment was to say no. The Prime Minister should not have the only say, that if there is to be a public inquiry, as we believe there must be, such an inquiry must be truly independent, and it must be perceived to be independent. And therefore, our amendment provided that all recognized parties in this House agree upon the head of the public inquiry to ensure not only the independence of that inquiry, but the perception that that inquiry is independent. And in that regard, Madam Speaker, it was Conservatives that considerably strengthened the very concurrence motion that this House is voting on or debating today. And, Madam Speaker, by contrast, what the NDP were prepared to do is to let the Prime Minister do a do-over of Rosenberg, in which the Prime Minister appointed a Liberal crony, someone who was the president of the Trudeau Foundation for several years, and not only was the president of the Trudeau Foundation, but actually facilitated a $200,000 donation from a Beijing political operative to the Trudeau Foundation. We said, no, that shouldn't happen again. That individual was appointed to review the 2021 election, completely undermining the credibility of the findings of Rosenberg's report. But, again, there you have it. The NDP playing games. The NDP talking out of both sides of their mouth, flip-flopping, putting forward weak motions at PROC. They say they want a public inquiry, but they were prepared to turn it over to the Prime Minister. And so, Madam Speaker, what we have is a completely unserious NDP when it comes to getting to the bottom of foreign interference, and specifically Beijing's election interference. The NDP have spent actually more time criticizing Conservatives, trying to hold us accountable, than they have the government, the Liberal government, that we know, based upon all of the reports and the limited documents that have been produced to our committee, have a lot to answer for, given that the Liberal Party was a beneficiary, or at least it was the objective of Beijing to assist the Liberal Party. So why would the NDP, why would it take weeks for the NDP to get around to doing what should have happened weeks ago, and that is for Telford to come to committee? She is, after all, the Prime Minister's top political advisor. She is arguably the second most powerful person in this government outside of that of the Prime Minister, and she was intimately involved in both the Liberal Party's 2019 and 21 election campaigns. I'm glad the cover-up coalition junior partner finally...
The honourable member's time is up, so it's questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable parliamentary secretary, the government house leader.
Madam Speaker, you know we have had professional, apolitical civil servants that have been very clear, that have indicated that there's no impact from any international interference, and particularly citing China, that had an impact on the outcome of either the 2019 or 2021 election. The Conservative Party knows that. We now have Mr. Johnston, an incredible Canadian that's looking into the matter and is going to be coming back with recommendation. An incredible Canadian with impeccable credentials. Will the Conservative Party support his conclusions?
Honourable member for St. Albert Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, first of all, Conservatives have been very clear that Beijing's election interference did not impact the overall election result in 2019 or 2021. But Beijing's interference may have had an impact in some ridings. And if it had an impact on any riding, that is alarming. It is a matter of national concern, and it needs to be addressed, which the Prime Minister has been entirely unwilling to do, dodging, deflecting, and covering up. Thank you, Madam Chair.
L'honorable député de Longueuil-Saint-Hubert.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Thank you, Madam Speaker. There's so much grey area here in this whole story. The government's refusal to accept an independent inquiry is unacceptable. In the Canada-China Committee, I questioned an RCMP officer. The Safeguard defenders were telling us that the Chinese police stations, they were community centers, helping people with clothing and housing, but then these community centers end up becoming intelligence centers, and Safeguard Defender documented that process. There are 2 centers in Quebec, one in Brossard and one in Montreal. 3 weeks before, though, there was an announcement that those 2 places in Montreal were Chinese police stations. The RCMP, though, denied that there were any Chinese police stations in Montreal. We knew that there were some. It was confirmed for Toronto and Vancouver. But the RCMP, that's a government agency, they denied it. Then, a few weeks later in the newspaper, we read that those were, in fact, police stations. So I want to know what our intelligence agencies know and what they don't know. What does the RCMP know? What do they investigate and what are they not investigating? It's unacceptable that we not get straight to the bottom of things with an independent investigation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I completely agree with my honourable colleague, and he highlights to what degree this Liberal government has turned a blind eye to Beijing's interference not only in our elections, but in other aspects, including aspects of our sovereignty, including opening up at least 7 illegal police stations. Under this Liberal government's watch, Chinese Canadian citizens are being intimidated and harassed. And what has happened? What have the Liberals done? No charges have been laid. No diplomats have been expelled. The best that the Global Affairs Minister could say is that 1 diplomat's visa was denied. That's it. That's not a government that takes Beijing's interference seriously.
We have time for a brief answer. The question, the honourable member for Hamilton Centre.
Madam Speaker, I'm confused. We heard the honourable member go at length about the NDP, railing about the NDP. He's very frustrated, and I can appreciate that, because we were able to get done at his committee what he couldn't get done over weeks of work, which is get Telford there. He should be thanking us. Instead, he stands up to deride us. So I'm going to ask him the same question I asked our House Leader. If their motion was so important, why is the Leader of the official opposition didn't even have the courage or the courtesy to Canadians to come in and support their own bill?
Yeah. That's right.
The honourable member St. Albert Edmonton, a brief answer, please.
Madam Speaker, I would remind the honourable member that it was the NDP that worked with the Liberals 3 times to block Katie Telford from appearing before a committee. That is the NDP record. They can't walk that back. They can't hide from that track record. It was only as a result of public pressure and conservative pressure and the fact that finally we put a motion before this House to have a vote of this House. It was only then that the Liberals capitulated, and finally the NDP capitulated to the cover-up coalition. I guess finally recognized they couldn't.
Time is up. The honourable member